This meeting is being recorded, just a reminder for everyone, that way we can all look back on it. Thank you for attending this kind of special ad hoc meeting. This is specifically to discuss the new WUI codes that will go into effect in January, and then talk through some of the ways that that will be implemented that will affect the projects that many of you work on in the city. We have a lot of work to do internally to make sure that we're setting everyone up for success in terms of education and making sure we're understanding how this all fits into our permitting process in some way. So the PowerPoint that we have is really very, very similar to what you'll see at the city council meeting next Tuesday. The council will be making some decisions about parts of this. The main idea is that staff is recommending to the council that they adopt the WUI code as is, without any additional or more restrictive standards. The thought is at this point, this is a pretty significant change for the community already. We want to make sure we're doing it well before we expand it or make it more restrictive in ways. And so for each of the different chapters that are applicable to kind of development in the WUI, we talk through where it's applicable in the city, like what fire zone, what types of projects, and then a little bit about what that would look like in a project. So we have a lot of staff members here that are related to different parts of the development cycle. And so we're here to answer questions, hear from you. There's probably answers that we don't have yet for things we haven't thought through. So that's also helpful, is to hear questions as they come up so we can figure out how we're gonna address various situations. Before I jump into this, I usually have a whole slide of like upcoming things, but other things that you all might be interested in is we're having a special council meeting on October 28th for renter protection discussion. So the staff report will be out a week before that, but this is a discussion that may be interesting to you if you develop housing or own housing units or are a renter or a landlord in the city. A discussion about what is the current state law protections for renters and where can the city go beyond that? What other programs can they use? We've heard a lot in the community about wanting some sort of rental registry in the city. So if that's of interest to you, please stay tuned for that. The other thing I wanted to let you all know is we have a principal planner position open in the community development department. This is our housing team. And so Teresa will be retiring. So if you know anyone that you'd like to see be considered for that position, we're really looking for someone who is passionate about housing, passionate about facilitating housing in the community and working with our development community to get more housing built. So please have them contact us or apply. So I just wanted to let you all know.
Is that role going to be like what Teresa's already doing, or is it more like what Rachel?
It's what Teresa's already doing. Okay. So she's technically a principal planner. Her title is a little different. Yeah. But Rachel's a principal planner, Teresa's a principal planner, and Brian is, and then there's kind of different specialties that everyone has, but it will be that role. So overseeing the housing and homelessness response team. And Fire Marshal Daniel is back. So
hey everybody, how's it going?
He has been instrumental, obviously, in all of this research and looking into the new WUI. So he and I are going to be tag teaming this presentation. And again, stop us where you want to talk about things. There's like some areas that are a little meatier than others. Happy to answer questions. If we're going too deep into like background, it's like stop talking, let's get to the good stuff. So we can kind of pace this as you want. There's a lot of stuff here, but we can stop wherever people want, and I'll periodically stop and see if there's questions. Lala will keep an eye on people online and raise a hand if there's any questions. So with that, again, here to talk. So I just so you know,
oh, stop. Leave.
Donna, you're not muted. If that was on. So we are recommending a staff to adopt as is. And so we talked through kind of why that would be. So you'll see that throughout here. So background, you want to take it away, Josh? Just give a brief
Yeah.
overview.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all familiar with what happened on March 10th when the state came down and issued the new maps. It's imperative that we understand that this is a hazard map and not a risk map. So two different types of maps that were issued. This is something that was supposed to have happened every 5 years, and the governor said enough is enough. You need to start issuing these maps. And so we were in the top 3 of the cities in the state of California with the greatest impact. So we went from 38 parcels to just under 3,000 parcels now in the very high zone, as you can see. So those maps, according to City Council, obviously had to adopt it. There was no choice in that. Here's the breakdown of our parcels that are affected. So 2,845 in the very high, 1,600 in high, and 4,000 in the moderate. For a grand total of just under 8,000 parcels in a designated WUI zone. So WUI zone would be all the colors that you see in front of you. Why? What's the context of this? Briefly, we all understand historically California kind of has a 5th season, right? It's fire. Fire is a season. It's always been here in the state of California. It will always be here in the state of California. And so in addition to that, population growth estimated to the census, 12.7% of Californians live within a WUI zone now. That's a statewide. Taking a look at the Palisades in Eaton, so that's a Palisade fire right there. Photo, we had 30 fatalities, 16,000 plus structures were destroyed, 28 billion in property loss. 28 billion is actual direct insurance loss. That doesn't count for the other estimates of the financial costs to the community. Those are around 250 to 275 billion dollars in loss to the community. Okay, so part 7, and why we're here, is of the 12 parts of the standards of building code. 7 is now the new California Wildland Urban Code. This is language that has been combined from the International WUI Code. It's been around since 2003. They formed that code in 2001, adopted it internationally in 2003. So a lot of languages from there, including part 7A of the building code and chapter 49 of the fire code. And then a lot of other information from government code, government resource code, code of resources, or residential code. So there it is the cover of that particular code. Trying to give you guys a high level look at this stuff. This is what the city council can do. City council can only make this code more restrictive. We have to make that understood. Their maps, we could have made more restrictive. We chose not to do that. The recommendation of staff was not to do that. City council agreed with that. The code is the same. We can only make more restrictive. It is staff's recommendation, as Director Toye just mentioned, to adopt this as is. We all understand how code cycles work. We have to live with this for 3 years. So when we got together and met multiple times about this, it was, let's not make any substantive changes to this that could potentially have some sort of effect that we're unaware of. Because again, this never existed. This is brand new. So let's just live with what it is. Let's figure out the minutia of it moving forward, and how does that directly affect like the individuals at this table or on Zoom for our community.
So through the rest of the presentation, you'll see kind of key points that we highlight. And so again, the major recommendation from staff to council in the staff report right now, and as we will talk about next Tuesday, is adopt as is. It's already enhancing fire safety in the community. It's a lot of change. Let's make sure we do it right. And the key points are going to be highlighted for you all. And those are the things we're asking council to confirm that they're good with what our recommendation is. Some of them are routine. It's like adopt the new WUI code. They don't really have a choice, right? Or make sure that our internal definitions are consistent with the new state definitions. Some of them are places where the council could have a little discretion, and we've highlighted that for them. So, you know, we talk about what type of compliance we're going to do for this. Do we want to do proactive or reactive? And so we have a recommendation for them. They could say, no, we want to do something totally different. So we've highlighted for them where those things are.
Okay, so this basically takes the same map that you saw with the different colors and combined it into a purple color, showing just exactly the WUI area as defined it by chapter 3 of the WUI code. It says the WUI area is all of those moderate, high, and very high. And so we've changed the color to purple to just show and illustrate to you just how impactful this has been to the city as far as the WUI area goes. This is for clarification purposes. When we talk about the fire hazard severity zone, what we're talking about is the colors of those zones, fire hazard severity zones. So you should have red is the very high, orange being high, and yellow being moderate. So there it is. That is the very high zone. Now this is going to be probably where most of you and I know community is going to live in as far as have questions or concerns. This is where the highest level of restriction goes, and this will be where chapter 6 applies. So it's important to know where that is. When we talk about zones, I wish they had changed the language a little bit different, but when we talk about the modification zone or fuel modification zone as it's listed in chapter 6, what they're talking about is zone 0, zone 1, and zone 2. So if you see a number, what they're talking about is the feet or distance from a structure, not the zone color. It's different. Zone color is the hazard map. The zone 0, 1, and 2 is the feet from a structure. And we'll get into it, but zone 0, we want to specify still in draft form within the committee. Here we are. This is the overall chart describing what each of these chapters mean, their applicable zones, and the scope. So chapter 3 is very simple. It's just it's kind of a definition chapter that says this is what defines the WUI area, and that is defined by all 3 fire hazard severity zones. Chapter 4 goes into water supply and access for new developments. That is going to be more of a lift onto the city because of road engineering standards. But there is a few driveway things that we have Gabe here. He can speak to the details of that if you have questions. Water supply, there's no changes to our water supply. In fact, going through and doing the census upon our water supply, we meet the minimum standard, and in most cases or exceed that standard with our water supply. That's a very big plus to our community when it comes to community resilience. Chapter 6 is the very high hazard severity zone. If you remember 2 slides back, that is just the red. So chapter 6 applies to just the red zone, very high fire hazard severity zone.
So now we'll go briefly through the chapters. This is kind of the meaty part where we'll talk about how it might impact the development process and or the outcome of development proposals.
Chapter 3 speaks directly to the mapping that has already been done. That's done by the state. Talks about the periodic review of how that's going to roll out. It's every 5 years, but there's always that little asterisk that says as needed. So every 5 years you can expect moving forward. In 2030, we're going to see another map. Quite honestly, if I'm being honest with you, if I'm the map maker and I have to justify my job, I'm probably going to expand the maps, right? So let's just kind of live with that now. So when these maps are going to be rolling out, it will then have a domino effect for change for us and what applies where. Okay.
Can I ask a question on the maps?
Sure.
Obviously, there's a state responsibility area outside of this, some of which is red, right on city boundary.
Mhm.
So do the regulations of these maps reflect the fact that something on the other side on the city side of that red zone also has to have some setback?
We were going to regulate the LRA, and when the map was created, they did not take in consideration a lot of elements, a couple of things that you just named in that question. It's a hazard map and not a risk map. So it's important to distinguish between those two things. Fire doesn't say, oh, I'm burning in the state zone, so therefore I have to burn this way, right? Oh, I'm a fire in the LRA, so I have to burn this way. So fire doesn't do that. So when staff is faced with a discretionary decision, when there is a line of delineation like that, we absolutely are going to look at that wholeheartedly and figure out where the code says.
Okay, thank you.
And who made the original maps of the state?
The state did. Yeah. I believe Board of Forestry took the lead on that one, but I can. Okay, chapter 4 is the fire access and water supply as we previously named. So we're talking about roads, cul-de-sacs, turnaround, dead ends, things like that when it comes to the road widths. We already have a engineer standard in the city for fire access. It had, the road cul-de-sacs has changed. They've added it to 5 feet larger to be exact. And then a little bit of a expansion on the driveway access. Water supply didn't change. They just took the appendix BB of the fire code and copied and pasted and said, this is going to be your water supply standard. So maybe not necessarily where your most concern is, but just know that the city is within or exceeds in those two elements.
What are we defining as a driveway?
A driveway?
Yeah, well, because there's like, in a subdivision, it's a driveway, people park in front of their garage. Is that what we're talking about here, or like a private access driveway to like someone's house that's a little bit more remote?
Yeah, do you wanna?
Yeah, so the way I read the code is it's the drive lane back to the house.
Okay.
But of course, the apron that's tying up the street, like the concrete curb and gutter and apron that you would typically see out on the street is maybe considered part of that. So it's mainly width requirements on that part of it. But there's width requirements and structural requirements as well as vertical curb and horizontal curb requirements in this code for the actual drive lane back to the structure. To be honest, just given where the zones are in our city, it's the hillier parts of town, so I'm not anticipating there to be any huge subdivisions in those areas. So it's going to be a little bit more flag lot or smaller types of subdivisions in those areas where you typically have a longer driveway.
Perfect, so you'll see the strategic next step is really just something that staff is going to do, which we're gonna include some updates in the city's engineering standard, just so we're consistent and it's clear to developers what you need to do to comply, so that everything's consistent. Chapter 5.
Chapter 5, okay, let's get in the meat and potatoes of it. So the 5 is going to be all of the ignition resistant materials or structural hardening, or what is commonly known as home hardening. This is, let's play the video. Let's make sure it's muted, it's kind of loud. This is our guys at the Palisades. I want to point out a couple of things. This is a hardened structure, has a strong defensible space. He's able to post up in this position in a safe location, keep radiant heat back, keep the flames from direct impingement onto the structure. And then when he turns the camera around, I want you to notice how many embers are being blown through here. So he's going back and he's checking, did any fires get between me and my engine and my way out? These guys are constantly evaluating, did the hose get ruptured? They're looking at making sure there's no fires that have started so they don't get trapped. The outcome of this firefight right here, so this was the fire coming in from the north down into the Palisades. It was already blowing up most of the homes. They went down this road, saw that, it's in the Huntington Palisades community, if you know where that's at. They saw that these homes met the defensive space home hardening requirements because this is firefighter safety. They were able to directly affect 4 homes and save all 4 homes because of this firefight right here. So that's the why where we're at, right? We have to have a hardscape on the ground that protects our homes, protects our hoses, protects the firefighters. The only loss that this particular home had to the right in the screen is the fence. We had to physically cut the fence down, made of wood, because it was causing ladder fuels to go into another wooden structure. They defined it as a playhouse. The playhouse was the total loss, and the home was safe. Here we are. We all know and understand the building home hardening type requirements. So we're talking about a Class A roof, eaves, siding, tempered glass windows. Up until this point, since 2012, the city has required home hardening components, but not all of them. Moving forward, there is no option on this. We're going to be requiring all home hardening aspects. This one is another demonstration of the importance of both housekeeping, of keeping the debris off of the roof and off of the gutters. We're looking at not having vinyl gutters anymore, but metal gutters, and then gutter guards. Protecting our vents with a 1/8 inch or 1/16 inch, I believe it's 1/8 in the code, to make sure that the spark arresters, and the practicality of it is this, embers that go into an attic of a home, and I have video evidence of this to show you, that's a loss. we can't fight interior structure fire in a wildland firefighting setting. So if we start to identify that this home is on fire inside because of embers put inside, we cannot make firefighter entry. That is a whole nother level of complexity, and we're there to stop the community and not save the structure. So these are elements that are actually critically important to close up, so like close up sockets and having our downspouts made of non-combustible material.
Do you want to touch on briefly, you know, you said we already require some of them. What are the things that are going to be materially different for new buildings between yesterday and
Sure.
January
The
7th?
biggest ones are gonna be the glazed windows and the gutters and downspouts made of non-combustible material. Everything else we've already been requiring since 2012.
I would say exterior decks too.
Yeah.
We have
What's that?
exterior decks.
Oh, yes, exterior decks.
Listed in the stack, right? All these are new items that are listed in chapter 5.
I think in the staff report, we gave like examples of what we
Okay.
talk about. But I don't know if we specifically said, you know, the
What's
only
new?
new things here are this, but it's those 3 things essentially.
Okay, so chapter 5 applies to all new development and construction citywide. And the reason for this, or why we landed on this, is because we're designated as a community at risk. And so therefore, any remodel or where we're pulling permits or any new development within the city is going to have to comply to chapter 5 requirements. And again, that's the ignition resistant building materials.
And so an important distinction is, so like new building, new ADU, yes, must comply. New home, yes, must comply. Remodel or addition to a home built after 2008, that remodel or addition must comply, but you don't need to retrofit the rest of the house, right? Go ahead.
Is there a dollar amount to trigger?
So what we're gonna be probably landing on is, let's say you have a single family home and you're doing a full remodel. We will likely go with our existing kind of definition of demolished, which is 50% of the structure is being demolished or changed. That's when we require you to come up to current building code or meet zoning code requirements if you're non-conforming anyway. And then, again, only impacts projects with a building permit, and is, you know, this is part kind of the average homeowner, just we've heard this concern. It's not retroactive. We're not going around to people's houses right now saying, you don't have a Class A roof, you need a Class A roof. This is only if you're doing a project. It's not gonna just blanket change the way we do we're not enforcing on existing buildings.
So for chapter 5, what is, because it seems like it's a voluntary step that the city is taking. It's not, who is?
Previously it was. Previously, the city
Yeah.
went above and beyond and applied some of these building material requirements when we did not necessarily have to.
Uh-huh.
This is the bare minimum. This is the as is, adopting it per the state that we have to do. I guess.
Chapter 5, we don't necessarily, city of Slow, the entirety doesn't have to adopt chapter 5, right?
Yes, it does.
Because of what we previously had voted on in
No,
2012.
because you're the city attorney sitting next to you, like,
Right on.
next to you, but, yeah, go ahead, Lucia.
Yeah, in 2001, the federal government designated the city of San Luis Obispo as a community at risk. And
Yeah.
being on that federal risk list requires us to apply Chapter 5A to the entirety of the city, and that is not within the city's control or discretion.
So like, because I looked at that list and like Santa Maria is on there, which isn't in any sort of zone. Grover Beach is on there, which isn't in any zone. It seemed like almost every city in California is in that risk. So is it just that all of California has to, you know, essentially adhere to chapter 5
Pretty
now?
much, yeah, I mean, I'll play you the video again.
Yeah, I know,
Like,
but it
it really.
we're
has-
saying even homes that aren't in a zone or, you know, aren't even considered wildland are gonna have to adhere to chapter 5 now.
Correct, but how far do embers go, right? So we look at the ember cast, so, so you can have a fire that is 2 miles away, and so we, especially for the city of San Luis Obispo and the bowl that it sits in, and what we are surrounded in, it makes perfectly logical sense that we landed on where we're at, that we are a community at risk, and so we're going to not allow any more new homes to be built without the home hardened components.
And also, what's the significance of 2008?
Oh, the 2008, so in
Yeah.
2007 was the new code cycle. And what happened in 2007 and 2008 was devastating fires. And so they went back and did a mid-cycle review, they being the state, and said, okay, enough is enough. We're now going to say any home built after July 1 of 2008 now needs to meet the WUI requirements or home hardening requirements. They did not retroactively make that to all existing structures because they can't, is the reality of it. But any new structure being built after this date will comply. Yeah.
So it's a point of that, basically.
Yeah, and so that will live for
Requirement points back to 2008 cutoff point.
100%, and that will never change. That'll be moving forward. Okay, where are we at? Still. Compliance. Okay, so starting with home hardening compliance and the building permit process. So we're going to start with some of the plan check and then the inspection. Did you want to talk a little bit at this point about the plan check
I think
side of things, or you were?
yes, so this is kind of the first place where we need to stop for a second, and this obviously is a change from what we do now. I think the good thing is it's not a astronomical change. We already require a lot of these things, but this is something that now we will be looking for all of the things in chapter 5, applying citywide, and so that's gonna be part of the building permit review process. And one of the things that we're working on is how can we help, educate and get the word out and make sure people have a clear list of things. So that's internally what we're gonna be looking at. And then obviously the inspectors go out and make sure that you're compliant with your plans that were approved. So that will be kind of the second place that this is checked, but hopefully everything is correct on the plans, and so there's nothing, caught in the field, but those are the kind of 2 checkpoints for the city. And again, we're gonna keep training internal staff and support educating ongoing. Yeah.
Have you guys talked about a voluntary home hardening program and how the city could support that through inspection and maybe even a permit process for that?
That's a great point. So you'll see, no, not yet. I mean, we'll be partially because we're so focused on just making sure we get the requirements correct. You'll see when we start talking about chapter 6 with defensible space and vegetation, there's been more conversation of, if I'm a homeowner and I just want to make my vegetation, I'm not asking for anything, but a similar thing. I'm a homeowner and I just want to make my home hardened. Is there a way we can facilitate that or incentivize it in some way? I think that's a really good.
Because it feels like it could be a good revenue source for the city too. I feel like a lot of clients that we've talked to, if you said hey, for $2,500, the city will come out, make recommendations, and then inspect the work, I think that people would be super stoked on that.
We have divided the this very complex code into 2 parts, the defensible space and then the home hardening, and trying to attack it separately because there's so many triggering mechanisms for each, right? So whereas home hardening really only gets triggered on a remodel after a home that's built after 2008, is a little bit different than that of defensible space, because defensible space is retroactive to all parcels, right? So we are implementing we're recommending for a voluntary home assessment program. We were able just granted a $60,000 grant through FEMA in order to help upstart that program. When it comes to the home hardening, if you look at Appendix F and G, there is a home hardening recommendation that we've created into a flyer and have been pushing it out everywhere we go. And because what I don't want to see, and I think that to your point, is an individual who is on a limited income, that some of this stuff can be very expensive. We want them to do what gives them the greatest amount of effect or protection when it comes to home hardening, right? So maybe they start small with some of the attic vents and putting in retroing those things to put spark arresters in. Maybe they start closing up soffits. We have that recommended list, and they can do that short of a permit, really. I mean, they can go in and do that.
So just devil's advocate on that.
Sure.
Some of that stuff is going to create permit issues in terms of venting and, when you close-in soffits and you don't provide vents, that's when people roofs rot. Like there is a more complicated part to this, and again, I do have customers, we have people who've reached out that want voluntary home hardening. That frankly don't, I know that you guys are thinking about people on fixed incomes,
Yeah.
but also frankly don't care what it costs, right? If we think about the San Luis Drive neighborhood, most of those folks are in pretty well positions on their homes, and what they want to know is that they have improved their home in a way that's substantial and durable. So just food for thought.
That's a super interesting point, John, and I think we need to think about that internally is like, there's a bunch of things we could potentially do with that, even create a new permit type that's just like voluntary home hardening, and it's like a suite of things, and it has some kind of streamlined process, right? I think we gotta think through what are the ways we can incentivize, or at least not be a barrier to that when people wanna do these things voluntarily, because I think that's a really good point, and we've been thinking through, okay, someone's doing a different project on their house and now they're caught up in this code, but what if this is what they do want? What if this is the primary reason they're doing the work? So.
And that could be
thank you
folded
for that.
into the DHA detailed home assessment that we're doing.
Yeah.
So, and we're looking at internal training of our staff, because my staff's not trained on home hardening type components, right? And doing that would be a building Trevor issue. So, so instead of sending 2 people and you having to have scheduled from 2 different departments, maybe we can do something all encompassing. So I appreciate the point.
And then the strategic next step here is, again, like I was saying, this is just our recommendation to council to adopt it as it is, carry over any local building code amendments that we have, and then make any necessary conforming amendments where we have some inconsistency.
Perfect. So chapter 6. So this is the chapter that goes into great detail about the vegetation and landscape. There's probably more for this group, probably a little bit more questions on fire protection plans, vegetation landscape plan questions. So we want to make sure that we have enough time for that. Hopefully we'll be able to do it. This is just an example of what defensible space looks like. You'd be surprised that most people just don't know what that is. They don't know what that looks like. And so there we provided an example of what we're looking for from the WUI code's perspective or from the state's perspective. We've created enough space away from the home. There's some hardscape. The furniture, the patio furniture, that's fine. Our guys are trained to go move that and throw it in your lawn. So at least you have a home that's standing. Your patio furniture might not be, but your home is still there. So this is kind of where the state is kind of pushing legislation and looking at wanting us to go. And of course, there's a lot of variables in that, because not every lot has that much space to work with, right? Here's another example of just hardscape around the home. Fire protection plans, vegetation plans for new developments, and the enforcement of defensible space. So that's what this chapter really focuses in on, is those three elements. So okay, we're on that one.
Could you back up onto the landscape piece a little bit? Maybe this is a question for Timmy. Is that
I can't go backwards. No, Steve, I can't.
things like artificial turf, it burns. So that's a different, we did a lot of that for drought purposes, but now it becomes a flammable piece. And then the ember casting that you referred to, no gorilla hair, no mulch, no anything. The other one that comes to mind is that we're always encouraged to push the house close to the open space.
Yeah.
That's probably a thing of the past, because we tend to put those houses onto unmaintained open space. So you're not gonna pick up all the dead wood in the bottom, the trees go together, so I'm just sort of thinking out loud as to the kinds of things that we're gonna be thinking differently about in the future.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. Well, there's a few more slides where we get into more of the details, but a lot of that, one of the other things we've talked about is, this is Rachel's favorite topic, is our tree ordinance. So right now, if you remove a tree, you're required to put in another tree. And we might be in a situation where someone has a smaller lot and they're like, hey, anywhere I put this tree is with, it will overhang over a structure on the property. We're also densifying, right? We're getting more ADUs. We want that, but now we're constrained in space. And so one of the things, it's a later slide, but we're also looking at our tree ordinance to see how can we make it more flexible so that people can still, we still have protections in place that we think are appropriate in the community, but we are not forcing people back into a situation of, we're trying to move people away from by crowding and over densifying with trees, using the right trees, things like that. So I think, you're right, this is gonna change the way we do some things, and we're starting to work through what that looks like.
Should I wait for my tree question? to
No,
be done?
go for it. You wanna-
Well, so is anybody from the city arborist office here?
He's in the call, he can jump
Okay,
in.
great, because that's super important,
Yeah.
right?
I'm also very involved in that.
Yeah, but I think that, like, if you think of those ficuses downtown, I think there's a ton of trees that need to be trimmed now. And within a 5-foot radius, that means that it's very likely that the tree that you're needing to trim is on your neighbor's property.
So let's first remember that the parameter is in the very high hazard zone,
Right.
My office is at 441 Marsh.
right on the
There are
end where it
2
says that.
giant ficuses that are,
And it's just slightly red right there,
no, it's in
map
the
is
high,
red.
it's in the high, it's in the high,
high,
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, very high.
yes,
Are you in the high or very high?
very high.
Okay, so yes, so the very high is is first and foremost for the table in the room that's the triggering mechanism, right? So I wanna make it clear that we're not imposing those types of restrictions on somebody that's in the moderate or that, or high, so it's very high. So yes, that, in that case, there's room for existing trees, it goes into greater detail about existing trees, we wanna make sure that the canopy of those particular trees are 5 feet above the roof or 10 feet from chimneys. This is where I think the benefit of having a detailed home assessment is where I can send somebody out that's trained and be able to come up with a management plan in conjunction with you. And we would say, hey, this is how we would see this to be able to be compliant.
Yeah, and I guess what I was driving towards with the ficus conversation is that we have been dealing with these trees downtown. They've been hampering development, they're tearing up the sidewalks, and Matt's grinning, right? I just like, and like, I think that this could be the hedge to the conversation about, are these 30 and 40-year-old mature trees that are destroying city infrastructure really where we want to go? And if you guys are asking for recommendations about council, I applaud that you're not trying to add extra layers of conditions, but you should consider if there's some things to prep council that they're gonna need to take action on. So I think that the trees are a really good example of city policy that may just need to change more rapidly than the standard zoning change process, right? So you guys may need to take a stand, and I don't know the legal tie to the trees and the ficus trees and just the tree ordinance in general. But since it's an ordinance, I'm assuming that it requires city council action to change it.
Yes, and there's 2 things here, and that's also a really good point on this. There's 2 things going on. One is trees on private property. Those are regulated, through the city ordinance, and that is. The other thing that's gonna come up, and I'm bracing myself for this, right, is like, you can control what's on your property. So we don't live in a very, very rural area where you have, 5 acres for each house, and you can easily deal with trees that are right next to your house and probably keep trees away from your neighbor's property, keep everyone happy. We're in a more dense environment. And so, like, I have a tree that's on a neighboring property that is close to my chimney. So like, that is going to be difficult, right? So this is gonna also cause some issues between neighbors of maintenance, and maybe someone wants a tree removed that another person doesn't want removed, so we're gonna have to work through what does this look like, and that is gonna come up. And the other thing that you bring up is the city tree issue, or trees in open space, and so I think that is also something, to that point, is that may facilitate a community conversation earlier than we thought about city trees and the appropriate types of trees on city property or in parkways. So thank you for that comment as well, and you're totally right, and we had a update to the tree ordinance. I think we all know the tree ordinance needs some work, and we're planning to update it, and this effort with the fire maps is pushing that much faster than we thought, because we're seeing the places where, it's not directly inconsistent, but there are things in it where you're like, this isn't great, right? And so that's pushing that change faster than it normally would go.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so, previously mentioned, so fire protection plans in 602, section 602, fire protection plans. Get to,
So before you go there,
Yeah.
I think what's important for chapter 6 is we have fire protection plans and then vegetation plans. So first, fire marshal will talk about fire protection plans, which will be more applicable to like subdivisions, larger developments. Yeah, go ahead.
What are we considering subdivisions and large developments?
Yeah, I mean, and that, we are landing on the definition of that right now, and I mean, part of it might be, you know, when you see it, and I think what I'd like to tell this room, and you can tell me I'm wrong if I am,
you're always right.
but our intent, that's right. Our intent is to make this as easy as possible for you to comply with. So when we talk about a fire protection plan, sorry, I know I'm stealing your slides, but okay. You need size and nature of the project, map identifying fuel modification zones, okay, like with the 5 feet, the 30 feet. Showing that you're reducing vegetation around access and evac routes, legally binding statements regarding community responsibility. This is like us seeing that the HOA documents say, hey, the HOA shall ensure compliance with all the requirements of the fire department and will maintain this annually or whatever. And so it sounds like a big scary new thing. A lot of the stuff in here, if we already get with our subdivision, you know, like I think a very obvious example is Fern Ranch, right? Big new Avila Ranch, Salmos Ranch, big new subdivision. Where's your fire protection plan? Okay, it clearly states what the HOA will maintain in terms of fire safety, what each individual homeowner will maintain. It clearly shows that you're maintaining your evac routes, things like that. So it's stuff that we kind of already look at through the process. It's just formalizing it in a plan. And so as we work through this with you all, I mean, I hope you understand the intent is that it needs to be in a plan. It's stuff we already looked at, and it's not going to be overly burdensome is the idea. It's just you being able to reiterate to us so that the fire team can go, yep, they've thought about these things, and where necessary, they're incorporated into the CCNRs or the HOA documents. So subdivisions is a little easier, right? Anytime we're subdividing land. The larger projects, I mean, I added that in there just for things that may not officially need a subdivision map, but would make sense to have something like this. And I think an example is, and we probably won't see this a lot, but you know, a very large commercial development where you have a big common space for parking, you know, Madonna Shopping Center, right? Like where over time, you want to make sure there is a plan that property owner might change hands a few times. You might have tenants in there, but there's a plan where everyone knows all of these things, proposed plans, how they're going to continue to reduce vegetation. It says how often they'll do maintenance of some open space they have or whatever. So that's kind of what we're thinking for the type of project that would need this document.
So for subdivision, we're thinking anything that needs a tentative map or final map, like anything that's essentially 5 parcels or more, or are we thinking even 4, like just anything that's a parcel map?
I don't know. I mean, I think, and this is where the state law doesn't define, but when you read it, it talks about legally binding statements regarding community responsibility. And so it to me is clear that this isn't necessarily applicable to me building just a single family home. Like how will I do that, right? So it's clear that it's about like a larger kind of development and subdivision of land. So, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think just to reiterate, this is again only in the very high fire severity zone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of parcels in there, and so I think the amount of ability to subdivide in some of those areas is gonna be pretty limited anyways.
So that's something where, you know, I hope we will have some more clear guidance for people. But we absolutely will know it when we see it, when it's a brand new Fern Ranch coming in. But I don't imagine this will actually apply to very many things in these zones, just given the parcels that we know exist there.
That's the fire protection.
Fire protection plan, yeah.
And the way I've had to digest it is, as I've looked at it as kind of, this is a 30,000-foot view of a very large project. And we want to look at all of those details before that project moves forward, is kind of the fire protection plan. I don't foresee, nor do I care to want to look at a fire protection plan for an ADU, right? And that let's just always remember that a fire protection, when the city requires stuff like this, I need to have people who are staffed to look at it. And I don't have that. So we're putting on more work on ourselves currently. So a fire protection plan is looking at the broad spectrum of things. However, if we go to the next slide, we're gonna talk fire protection plan 602, required fire protection plans for subdivision larger scale developments. I think we've kind of hit that through the building permit process.
So this is one where there is a little discretion here, right? I think the code says the fire marshal or the fire code official or whatever is authorized to require a fire protection plan. And so this is where this is our recommendation to city council. And I actually like as a tool for us with a lot of HOAs in the community, I actually think this is a great thing for the city to have on file and the HOA to have thought through fire protection as a group of homeowners with clear delineation of who shall do what. That sort of thing I think is actually very helpful for the future. Again, I don't think there's gonna be a lot of new developments in these areas, but I wish they all had something like this because, you know, you can probably imagine how many calls we get about people who like my HOA isn't maintaining this space behind my home. And if we had, okay, great, well, in their fire protection plan, it said they were supposed to do this thing every 6 months and they're not doing it, so they're not complying, right?
The only comment that I would say is, as it refers to entitlement, is it would be nice if that wasn't another load on the entitlement side and you guys kept it on the building permit side.
Okay.
Right, so like to add another layer of cost and design during the entitlement phase and then like not have the application be complete without the fire plan on a set of plans you don't even know if you're gonna go forward with and build, right? And so that I think that's super important that we don't just add another hurdle on the entitlement side.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. We'll talk about it, make sure there's nothing I'm missing, but that makes more sense to me as well, because then your things are more fleshed out anyway in terms of like where are your egress, because it might change. We don't want to approve a fire protection plan and then you get to building permits and things have changed so much that we're like, we need to redo this, right? So.
You know, it would be helpful also for, especially for smaller projects, if there was a template.
Yes.
We used to deal with this with storm drainage management. And you have to hire somebody to invent that. Well, here's what it is for Marsh Street Commons, and here's what it is for an Avila Ranch, and here's what, for something like that. So, because I'm hiring that talent right now for my part for Boom Ranch, and it's, they're all qualified, but it's kind of a mixed bag, whether they throw everything into the plan or whether they give you the Reader's Digest version, say do this, do that. I think there's a hesitation to do the Reader's Digest version because everybody's gonna be looking at it.
Yes, and I think what we could do as well is when we have the first one of these that is wonderful and beautiful and approved, is to even, you know, publish that, say this was because here are some examples of ones that are acceptable. And again, I don't imagine this to be a lengthy, complicated document. I don't yet know what fire marshal is gonna be looking for, but we are trying to make this as easy as possible, just to have the things that we need to see to make sure that people have thought through this.
But you could envision it the same as SWPP is. There's a form for SWIPy, right? There's a form for recycling that you guys provide.
Yeah.
So you could make this a form. So that you're not getting every different format.
It's
in
similar
the
to what
universe.
Steve said.
Steve and I are kind of saying the same thing.
There really are complications. I know in Froome Ranch, we've got some, you know, what's the downdraft coming off of Irish Hills? Is it, what's the slope effect? So what's the ember cast? That's the thing that really is just sort of flip the code on us. So there's some stuff there, but maybe that's done at a macro scale and say, okay, now that you've analyzed it, here are the standard mitigations and solutions.
Yeah, totally. I think that would be great. Lucia and
Yeah, I just wanted to,
No, please.
I just wanted to quickly add a couple things. So, as far as entitlements, like we do require a conceptual landscape plan with the entitlement. So just something to think about as you're, you know, kind of think about your vegetation and your landscape plan for these subdivisions. And then the second thing is, so there's a non-functional turf prohibition per state law. It goes into effect for commercial industrial properties in 2028 and common areas of HOAs. and common interest developments in 2029. So kind of your question about artificial turf and that burning, and then, you know, seeing in the photos, there's some photos of turf, and those look like more like, you know, single family homes privately, so this wouldn't apply, but just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about your landscape plans.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that the code section 602 has really prescriptive and clear items for those who haven't looked in the code yet of what must be in a fire protection plan. And so while the city might elect to create a form, I think even in an interim period, there's pretty clear direction from the state on what needs to be in there.
That's true. Thank you for saying that. There's two parts. There's the pre-fire plan and the fire plan. And we don't want to get into the slicing that out, but when it comes to the fire protection plan, it is encompassing both of those two sections in the plan. I want to throw a little bit on the AstroTurf thing, because that is a hot topic even at the state level. Is there's AstroTurf that has an ASTM rating, and that would be where I would like to see us go, right? And so an ASTM rating of a fire resistant rated AstroTurf, not just any AstroTurf, right? So let's use some basic logic and understanding here, and that if we have a fire resistant material that's down on the ground, who am I to say, hey, it's gone through the state level testing, it's recognized nationally, maybe we should be a little bit more okay with that, right? Those are the discussions that we're having internally, and figuring out the room for us to be able to put that in a pen to paper for you guys to know what it is that you can and cannot do when it comes to that, right?
Yeah.
So to blanketly say all AstroTurf is out is not accurate.
And then go ahead.
I think to your point though about the very clear rules, that is ostensibly how the tree ordinance is, but we're having to do custom tree protection plans and hire third parties nearly on every project now that's infill. And so there is a break point where, even though it's very clear and John Q homeowner feels like, oh, I can just do it myself, we are running into a break on that. So you have to be careful about this idea that, oh, it's in there, it's clear, just do it. Because we do run into where, and then you have this like snake eating its own tail, where we're hiring professionals and then the people of the city aren't necessarily accepting what they're saying. And so it's not always as clear as that. And we have got caught in that loop sometimes.
I would like to, we've talked about this separately. We've talked about this individually as well, where we take a group from this group and we sit down and flush that out. Because what I don't want to be is that guy that's like, no, this doesn't work, right? Let's take a look at what the code is requiring, to Lucia's point, and what it says, and let's define that at the very beginning, so that when you do submit these things, they're less likely to kick out. Again, that requires more staff time on my side that I don't have right now. So if we can get that cleaned and figured out at the beginning, and again, this is all new. Technically, they existed in chapter 49. We just never required it. Now we're being told we have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question online.
Greg, go ahead. You're still muted, Greg.
Can you hear me now? Better?
Yes.
I have a few questions, but I want to make sure you get through your presentation. Is there more to it beyond this slide?
About plants and landscaping. Yeah, we're about to get into defensible space.
Why don't you guys do that and then I'll jump in. Mine kind of go backwards and I don't want to slow you down.
Okay.
Sure.
All right.
This dovetails us into the vegetation plan. If the fire protection plan is 30,000 foot, I look at this as kind of as the 15,000. We already somewhat require these on certain things. We're looking at this now, and when you pull permits and you're building onto your home, we're going to want to be looking at these vegetation plans. There's language that says when required, and also when it talks about the fire protection plan, also it says inspection. It seems more not required, but whenever you want to do it type thing, right? Fire protection plan and vegetation plan, not necessarily required. This is the part that I think that the state has put me into kind of a rock and a hard place. If you look up California Code of Regulations 1270.06, it makes it very clear that when an inspection is being done in the very high hazard severity zone, it's done by the local agency. That's me. That's subsection C. And then it goes further in subsection F, and it says, when the inspection is conducted, they shall occur prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy and before the final inspection of any project or building permit. So in other words, if I don't require this type of information on paper and I show up to sign off on your final building permit and it's wrong, I don't want to be that guy saying you have to move this. I'd rather catch it on paper than when it comes to that point. I think we can all completely agree on that point. So that's why we were recommending, even though it's loosely said that we don't necessarily have to require it, we want to require that so that it catches that back out.
So basically, what you'll see is if you're doing landscaping and have a building permit application, we're gonna wanna see what existing plants are there and what are the future plants there. It will be reviewed by fire to make sure you're addressing, we're getting there with the, this, what we talked about, the zone, the different zones, right? That we're not running afoul of any of that requirement. And so we're working through what that looks like on our end. The other thing to note is technically, and this is where you talk about, this one is retroactive. So like technically any new plantings you're doing in the very high should comply with the new regulations. We are not proposing to have any sort of new permit that you have to, like, let's just say I have a home, I'm not touching my house at all, but I'm totally ripping up my landscaping and putting in landscaping. They're not going to require a new permit for us to review it, but you need to make sure that you're not running afoul of state law, because if your neighbor calls and says they don't have compliant landscaping, Josh's team is gonna go out there and enforce. So I think that's something for us to note is you need a building permit, you're changing landscaping, we're gonna review it, which is great for you, because then when you get an inspection, you've already complied and you're not having to change things in the field. If you don't need a permit and you're changing landscaping in a very high, you need to comply anyway, but we're not going to review it.
Is the city gonna be coming up with its own list of fire smart plants? Because when my guys go to Cal Fire and there's a list of prohibited, and you go to somebody else, there isn't a list. There's kind of a, well, this is what we think, and some say these are prohibited, but we're not gonna opine on whether they're allowed either. So is that something the city's gonna reconcile, like I think Santa Barbara County has?
Yeah, we talked a lot about this. My preference at this point, I think the direction we're gonna move in is a list of recommended plants that the fire department has looked at, our arborist has looked at, we've looked at, and so if I'm, again, a homeowner and I just wanna do the right thing and make my house fire safe, I'm like, great, here's the 45 plants. We're gonna try to get lists out to our local hardware stores and plant stores, so that if you go there and you don't know this is a thing and someone, asks for help, and then an employee can say, hey, you know what, the fire department has this list available to you, right? I hesitate for like an approved or not approved, because what I don't want is for staff to be in the business of when you submit a landscape plan, and then you have to go back and forth on like, this is a not allowed thing, this is an allowed thing. When you have a landscape architect, I think we're gonna be looking to them to say like, yes, we've used plants that are fire safe per the rate, there's a definition of what that means. And so, but if it's just a project without a landscape architect or a landscape person, to be able to pick from a recommended list, I think is what the direction we're gonna go in.
So the appendix F outlines 8 characteristics of vegetation that's considered fire smart per the state. Walter and I worked close, and I think Walter's on, he can speak at any time, but we worked closely in dissecting those 8 things and came up with that 3 of those 8 are really maintenance issues in its nature or its intent. It's just maintaining that plant appropriately. And there's really only 5 true characteristics of a plant that it needs to meet. And so he went ahead and already has supply of 20 recommended trees that exist that are from this particular area that we know meet those requirements, and we're pushing that out to the homeowners that are calling me on a daily basis. Hey, I'd like to change out these plants. What should I change it to? I direct them to that. And so I think to Timmy's point, we're not trying to get into a business of if you put a plant on a plans that we approve and then you go to purchase and they're not available, then that is problematic, right? And so we want to avoid that by keeping it a little bit loose.
I get it.
Yeah.
And I'll just say too, like I've already started looking at local resources, the SLO County, or the El Toro Botanical Garden has a whole fire, they call it the starter list of fire resistant plants. So it's a very, broad conversation that's happening throughout the state of California in terms of what those plants are. So I think we're gonna have a lot of resources for all of you as well.
And for the landscape architect, they just want to know out of my box of 30 crayons, how many are you taking away from me? Because that's what it is what can't I use? And the rest you kind of can mess around with. So,
And then,
I guess to that list, there is no list of, I get there are characteristics, but what the landscape architect's gonna look for is, okay, what's a permitted material? Especially I'm dealing with one that's a new riparian corridor. What's okay in there where you can also meet the riparian goals of lots of shade, protect the base. That's a complication that probably nobody else runs into, but it isn't as cut and dried as I thought it would be.
Yeah. And some cities, I worked in a city where we had a no list. So we didn't have it has to be this, but we definitely had 15 things that we would not let you put. And so that was a little easier for planners because they could flag like there's a palm tree, right? And so, that's something we could consider in the future if as we're working through this, we're seeing people proposing something that fire saying like, oh man, I wish we weren't seeing so many of X, Y, Z, we might start developing that, and that at least provides a little more parameters for the crayons. But I think it's a really good point of like, our development review process is clearly already complicated enough and we're reviewing for so many things. The last thing I want is, again, you change a tree and then it's like, oh, well, now your plans are different. I mean, that would be a nightmare for you and for us. We don't want to be in that business. So we're trying to figure out how we provide as much guidance and certainty as possible without overburdening the process. Go, Walter.
Hey, everybody. Walter, City Arborist here. I would just add that, the language that we're looking for in landscaping plans is fire smart vegetation, fire smart landscapes. And it may not necessarily be your traditional drought tolerant landscaping. What we're looking for is healthy landscapes, and healthy landscapes are typically hydrated. And so a lot of the landscaping that's going to be best are trees, plants that hold a lot of water in their leaves. And the lists that we provided from a tree perspective are trees that are drought tolerant, but are also going to benefit from that additional irrigation once or twice in the summer as part of the hydrated and healthy landscape.
Thank you, Walter.
The no list is a really good idea because what the next phase of what Steve is talking about is when the low bid landscaper gets out there and wants to use whatever is most readily available. And then the inspection has to figure out whether that's like close enough, because that's where it really especially on the bigger projects, that guy's just going to try to get a flat of whatever the lowest price similar looking plant is that he can get away with.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so I think we should talk internally about a no list, because that also makes it easier for the inspectors if they see something out there and
there's already sort of a no list or a list of within the code actually about tree species that they don't recommend anywhere near.
Right.
So I think
things like that.
Yeah. So I think that I like that idea. I made that note too, because I think there are some ones we can easily put on a list and say, we don't want to see these.
Yeah, I agree. So
moving on to defensible space. So to make this really, really clear, this is where we get into the zone 1, 2, and 3. Zone 0 is still in draft form. That's the 0 to 5 feet. But every parcel within the very high hazard severity zone is required to be maintained according to current zone 1 and 2 regulation now. That happened as soon as the maps were adopted, 20 days after the maps were adopted. So once that has happened, that accountability is already in place. When zone 0 legislation moves out of draft form and moves into wherever it's gonna land, there will be for existing structures a 3-year grace period, but it'll be immediate for anything new. So anything new that goes in, zone 0 will be required. Anything that is existing, there'll be a 3-year grace period post the date of when that goes. So we're expecting, if the Board of Forestry is to follow the executive order in 1825 from Governor Newsom, they're to have it by the end of this year. That means by January 1 of 2026, it'll post. That means January 1 of 2029, the existing structures will have to comply.
I think this is really important because everything we've talked about up till now was, someone is voluntarily doing something to a piece of property that is triggering something. This is the thing that will happen in the very high zone, regardless of whether someone is doing a project or not, is that they actually need to be complying with this, with the grace period. And I think that's the difference for the community, is this applies regardless of whether you're doing anything to your property in the next 3 years.
Yeah, and scientific research is driving this as far as IBHS has found that if 50% of the structure is considered heavily indensed around it, you double your chance of losing that structure. And so when they did ember cast studies in a controlled environment, embers fall into the vegetation around, no matter how healthy it is, everything will eventually burn. And if you put something within, say, 5 feet of a window or a door, it'll eventually compromise that and then get into the structure. Okay, yeah, just more terminology of understanding what a zone 0, 1, and 2 are. So we're talking about 0 to 5 and are also referred to as ember resistant zone. It's the 5 feet from the structure, including decking, attached decks, or even an ADU. If you have an ADU off to the side, it's gonna have zone 0 regulations imposed upon it in the very high hazard zone. Currently, we're looking at zone 1 and 2. That is active, that's carried over. So that is existing terminology from 2022. We're looking, zone 1 is commonly referred to as the fuel reduction zone. So we want to be reducing some of that density there. And then 30 to 100 feet for those lots that are applicable. And most of our lots are not in here, but some of them are. There's just more of an example of new construction in the WUI code for existing buildings, 3-year grace period, we've already mentioned.
I just want to know where you can develop 10,000 square foot lots like the illustrator. San Francisco.
So if someone has right now like a non-compliant shed or something that's within 5 feet of their house, does that have to get?
If it's considered a group U, it's it's exempt.
But if
It's
the
utility,
shed is
but it's
combustible and it's within 5 feet of the.
Oh, 5 of the home, yes.
Even for an existing homeowner without doing it?
They're saying that that it needs to be moved or measures need to be taken, yeah. And we're not gonna allow any new ones to be built, but if there's a 3-year grace period for mitigation measures.
Does this mean on some of these subdivisions, the houses are barely 5 feet apart? They're spread them out more or what?
Yeah, I've got a special jack. It's really kind of cool. It just,
going forward,
yeah.
they can allow you to build that close?
It just has to be fire resistant.
Are you talking about setbacks?
Yeah.
Like
And
orchid
there's
area,
barely
right?
5 feet between houses after the pavilion.
Yeah, exactly. So you have a home hardening of homes, and then you do not have any vegetation, especially a wood fence between those. I don't see any reason why we can't do that. But if you start to add in plant vegetation that is in a very small, you're making the problem complicated, and then you are facing the neighbor complaining, and I have to come out and do an inspection.
And I think the big thing for that, my brain goes here is the wood fences. And so you see literally almost every house I've looked at, just walking around town, has that wood fence connected to the house to close off the backyard or to enclose the trash can area. So that is combustible, right? And so that those fences moving forward, and on the wood, retroactively, when our grace period is over, You know, and we're gonna get into how this is gonna be enforced, but, you know, this is gonna become a neighbor issue of, neighbors calling in about people having new fences or piles of wood in their backyard within 5 feet of their home, you know, all sorts of things, right? So I think it's just thinking proactively, about how we address that, but then as you're developing new properties, it's making sure you're keeping this in mind with materials, fencing huge, right, landscaping obviously as well, so.
Just of course
Yeah.
administratively.
Yep.
Yeah, clarifying language to the code. This gets into the explanation of how and what that inspection process will look like. We automatically are inherited as a complaint based, the government code, so if somebody does call, then I'm obligated to go out and do an inspection and then do a notice. There's mandatory, some jurisdictions do a mandatory compliance, so like Napa County is another one, Ventura County, and they do an annual inspection. It is not staff's recommendation to do a mandatory type style of inspection, where I have people driving around just going from house to house to block and doing inspections. There's the voluntary inspection, and there's two terms that I do want to clarify, DSI and DHS. A detailed home inspection, what internally what we're referring to is an actual weighted document that's done from a badge member, a full-time member. Someone that says, to your point, hey, come on out and take a look at my home. We would like to have this type of, maybe it's a form for insurance, maybe for whatever the reasons are, they pay the fee. We provide that detailed home inspection, and then we give them a document. A detailed home assessment, that's where we are looking for some grant funding, actively seeking for some grant funding to be able to provide, say, some interns that would be able to go out and say, hey, this is what we see through our training, and then voluntarily that individual would say, okay, I'll start chipping away at the items on that list in order to comply. So we are obviously requirements for very high hazard severity zone using a complaint-based reactive method for the initial with an initial objection of education. So both Chief Tuggle and Director Tway here feel very strongly that the very first step in enforcement is education, and so we're going to be rolling out, especially during those first 3 years, a heavy education-based kind of inspection program.
And then another next step is to offer a fee-based voluntary inspection program, and then as the fire marshal talked about, seeking funding so we can strengthen that program over time, which would be ideal. And then our other next step is recommendation is to not perform AB 38 inspections at this time, and that's a resource issue.
Yeah.
And so I only have 10 minutes. I want to be cognizant of getting questions. I did want to just touch on, can you talk about this just?
Sure, yeah, this hit the news, the media, this is a YouTube link. This is a home that met 100% home hardening and defensible space requirements. No firefighter did any involvement in this structure. Nobody was posted up and pouring water on this structure. This structure, more than a mile all the way around, complete devastation to the ground, destroyed homes. But because this homeowner decided to take measures to the fullest degree, it withstood the Palisade fire and is still standing to this day.
So briefly, just want to talk through other considerations. At council, we'll talk a little bit about this, but it's, you know, talk to your insurance if you have concerns. And we're aware that insurance companies, we already know, insurance companies are telling people, you need to figure out this tree issue, right? So there's things above and beyond what we've even talked about that we're hearing from homeowners. So that's also one thing we're considering as we're looking at addressing the tree ordinances. Are there things we need to change there to help people when they're dealing with insurance issues? Real estate disclosures, again, this is not the city's direct involvement, but it is required if you're in the very high zone.
High and very high.
Sorry, high and very high. Steve, I put this in just for you.
Thank you.
But I I do want to note that this is kind of a funky thing we've run into, that the general plan prohibits currently subdivision in the very high zone. That's just language that has existed when the very high zone was 38 parcels at the very edge of the city and it didn't really matter. We have that language, so one of our recommendations is that staff obviously needs to come back to the council and say, this now means something very different than it did 12 years ago, so what would you like us to do? And, you know, I put Fern Ranch in there because, as Steve knows very well, the Fern Ranch specific plan has its own wonderful language that talks about how there won't be any development in the very high zone, and now the whole specific plan is in the very high zone. So these are some bigger level policy issues that we've run into that we're gonna have to figure out a path forward on that will require input from the city council. So just for people's awareness, and then we already talked about the tree ordinance, like no direct conflicts at this time, but obviously places where we're kind of flagging things as being something we may need to address so that we can help people comply with these new standards. So I'm gonna leave it there because I think, you know, I'd love to keep time for discussion.
Just really, so subdivisions aren't allowed in the very high fire severity zone. When is that gonna be updated to
So
relieve that?
we're flagging that for council on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then whenever, you know, we can get on a council agenda to discuss that, that's gonna be on the discussion. I mean, right now, council agendas are truly full through the year. But if we had someone, you know, ask for a subdivision, like that would, I think, kick things into place. But it's something we're aware of and we're gonna have to get on the council so they can address that.
Would that trump SB 9?
So
SB 9, you can't develop in very high fire severity zones anyways.
Yeah, it's written into the SB9 laws,
Yeah,
that disallows an SB9.
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Because that's a lot of that.
are there
Lot-
exemptions to
a lot of that southern stuff, like the southern part of downtown,
Yeah.
Yeah.
are
There are.
SB9 law.
Yeah, okay, so there's some exemptions, but I don't know that people could meet them essentially.
It's not a very useful exception.
But yeah, this is something we flagged, surprise to us all.
And-
Yeah,
This has all been like residential, but it's commercial too.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So what about the Welcome Home Village up there by Bishop?
so that is already approved,
Already approved, okay.
so.
It's
This was
also county,
County.
has superior agency
Yeah.
jurisdiction over the permission. for that,
Yeah.
So.
Because I think they're building like wood fences and stuff within the zone, so they'll have to address that, I guess.
Yeah, and so for
That's
that
already
one,
been addressed, I brought that to their attention.
Okay.
and that one, we were not the permitting agency either, so it was a funky
Totally.
situation where we flagged things that didn't issue permits. But I really, truly appreciate you all sitting through an hour and a half long discussion. I hope this was somewhat enlightening. This is again, what essentially what we presented to the city council. Okay, we have a question online, but your input is so valuable because you're the one sitting in the process. And I think too, what the fire marshal said, as we're getting closer to implementing these things, like I'd love to have some focus groups of people who, like John, what you said about, hey, can we have this kick in at building permit? I mean, that's really valuable feedback. And so as we're figuring out how to implement these, if people have suggestions or places where you're seeing potential conflicts or you're concerned about something, please let us know. We really appreciate it. This is kind of coming at us quickly, and so we're figuring out how to make sure we have a smooth pathway beyond January 1st.
What about infill downtown, like the property that John was talking about, it's in a high zone, can you not redevelop that property?
So you can, yes, yeah.
You can't
Right now,
subdivide
you
right now.
can't
You can't
subdivide.
subdivide.
No
You can't have
condos.
a map, a condo map.
Maybe in the apartment building.
I am not the city council, but I imagine they're gonna look at that. That's just a pure city thing. That's not from the state. And it's, again, it was because the fire zones were very different back then. I don't imagine that will stay around once we talk about it.
In its current form.
In its current form, right? There's a question online.
Go ahead, Greg. You're muted, Greg.
Try this. A handful of very short questions. Can you go back to slide number 25 if that's available? It's about
Yes.
chapter 5, home hardening. And my question has to do with home hardening. Does it apply in the yellow, the orange, the red, or all zones because we are a community at risk?
All zones because we are community at risk.
So everywhere.
All
Citywide.
I'm sorry, all city, whole citywide. Not even just, zones don't matter.
Citywide, okay. And then there was another slide, and I don't recall where it was. It said all eaves, I think it's this one, number 2, closed or boxed. So does this mean that in the new code, we are no longer allowing even the exceptions that are currently allowed for fireproof, non-combustible, etc. eaves? Now then the only option is closed eaves? That's what this graphic says.
You're reading the code.
504.3, Josh, I think non-combustible.
Currently, chapter 707A5 says, as long as you're making an attempt, be it fire retardant wood, non-combustible materials, gypsum board behind the wood, etc., open eaves are allowed. And I'm trying to understand if we're changing the look of our town by now, then everything will be a soffitted closed eave.
504.3.1, protection of open eaves. I see 7 different methods.
Yeah,
that one
I do too.
Okay, so then I would argue.
We'll fix the graphic.
Yeah, this graphic I think is just illustrative of one on the left, what it looks like to have a generally not hardened structure, and on the right, kind of a maximalist approach to hardening. But
I guess my point is I want to change the graphic because it's misleading in this point. From the look of it, they look identical. It just one says open and one says closed, but the graphic is the same. Thank you. I want to also be clear that historic buildings then being built prior to 2008 would be exempt from all WUI requirements, as would all buildings built prior to 2008. Is that correct?
Exempt from chapter 5.
Exempt from chapter 5. Is that right?
But not from.
I'm trying to understand. Like I can't I can't make a double pane window out of a historic single hung with wavy glass. So we're saying historic buildings are exempt, correct?
Correct, from the home hardening components. However, there's an internal discussion with staff right now on the vegetation management of that, because now you've opened up a Pandora's box on a 100-year-old oak tree that's next to a building that is not home hardened. And so we have to take some consideration and thought into that, and I assure you that is a topic of discussion right now.
Okay.
Something is in a very high zone.
Correct.
Yes, the home hardening additions, remodels, if the building is older than 2008, it does not kick in, except for does not kick in unless you demolish it per our definition, and then we'd be mad because it's a historic structure.
Which again, but just to be clear, demolish in our definition is 25%, as I recall, Timmy, right?
No, it's 50%. It's 50%.
It's not very much before you demolished this thing, and so it's a low bar. My last question has to do with the map itself, and looking at the map so far, the new version of the map seems highly pixelated, much less clear than prior maps. If you really zoom in, at this scale, it's easy to see red, yellow, but when you really zoom in, my question has to do with if it's red that just nicks a corner of the parcel, is the whole parcel red, or does the red have to touch the proposed building footprint? Or how do we determine if a parcel is in or out of the red specifically?
It goes by parcel, and if any part of red is on the parcel, it's considered in the higher level. So if it's most of it's in moderate, but part of that parcel hits high, it's considered high. Not the building, the parcel.
And we have an online tool where you can put in an address. I agree with you about the pixelation, but we have an online tool where you put in an address, it'll zoom right in.
We have a link on our website as well as CAL FIRE. This graph is just meant to show the intensity of the amount of colors that have impacted our city limits. But online, if you type in your address or any address that you have a project going, it'll take you right into, zoom into that parcel and show you where it lands on this map.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I want to be respectful of time. It is 1 o'clock. Does anyone have any?
Just real quick on the point about the pixelation, the link that I found on the website right now does take you to the CAL FIRE
Yeah.
page map, so that is probably just the level that they have their GIS data at.
Yeah.
It's not something.
Yeah, this is just a visual thing.
Yeah.
Not meant to be zoomed in.
Yeah. Any other questions? Comments? Concerns? Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Next Tuesday night, this will be the big item on the agenda. See where the council goes with things. I will email the developers roundtable group and let you know kind of the outcome, especially if there's, you know, if they veer in a different direction with any of the recommendations. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.